absolutely the descriptions of these entities and this inversion. And they're seeking to bring their reality into ours by syncing their frequency. The Golden Age society, the way it's described, and again in the way the Avatar movie portrayed that society, was a heart society. This was the point from which they interacted with the world, the heart, which allowed them to experience reality outside the bounds of time and space. When you come from the heart, you don't do hatred. The heart doesn't hate. The heart doesn't seek to destroy. And so this inversion was about taking the point of interaction with the world from the point of love, heart, into the emotions. And how do we see now our society and how people interact with it from the level of emotional response and emotional reaction instead of here? And when that moves to that we interact with the world here, the world dramatically changes. And so, like I said earlier, with this heart coherence with the central nervous system and the brain, once we get into this, we start to disconnect from the heart, disconnect from beyond time and space, and start to have this as the governor of our perception. And if you take it in a computer game terms, the idea is to pull us into the lowest level where this archontic force works from. Now, these Gnostic writings have been estimated to have been buried in that sealed jar between about 350 and 400 AD, which corresponds with the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria run by Gnostic thinkers. But it's suggested that they were possibly written about 100 AD. In those documents, all that time ago, best part of 2,000 years, they say that the archons can take form, and the main forms they take are reptilian entities and those known today as greys. The archons describe the greys as like an unborn baby or fetus with grey skin and dark, unmoving eyes. That was nearly 2,000 years ago, and it's the same description as what we call grey entities today in the modern world. And of course, I've been saying for a long time now that behind the human networks of control is a reptilian form. But I did say a long time ago, I didn't think it ended there. I thought it went into the realms of something else, and this something else is this archontic inversion, I would suggest. So when I was talking about the reptiles, of course, I got lots of ridicule. Hey, he's mad. And my response to that has always been the same as well. This has been my feeling about what they say. Because I simply want to know what the bloody hell's going on, me. Just want to know what's going on. Whatever it is, I want to know. And if people don't like it, well, they do the other thing, that's just as good. But is it madness, or is it seeing beyond the program? Like I say, condemnation without investigation is the height of their ignorance. But they say it's rubbish, but they don't investigate it. And yet, when the Daily Mail runs a story from some chemist, scientist, a few years ago, who said that he thinks from his research that there are reptilian entities all around in other dimensions, then he was treated as dead straight because he's a scientist, so he must know what he's talking about. And there was another study which was kind of projecting what some of the dinosaurs would look like if they hadn't been wiped out, as they say. And they came up with the fact that by now they would be humanoid reptilian entities like that, which is interesting because when you look at the descriptions around the world, this is a Zulu description, this is a painting made by a Spanish artist who said he interacted or experienced these reptilian entities. They are described in remarkably similar ways. And this is something called the Charney Project. And it's one of those kind of things that happen so often when I'm researching. I'll come to conclusions and I'll write it, and then something will come along and it will say, look at this. And long after I'd been writing about these reptilian entities, I read this article. I was in Nexus magazine, and it was by a whistleblower about a project called the Charney Project, Computer Interface Communication with Other Realms. And he said that in the 1990s here, 1994, for 5 years, they, at a kind of similar thing to what's happening at CERN, it was one of these collider things, but in Africa and smaller. For 5 years, they interacted through computer systems with an entity in another dimension, another reality, and asked a total of 20,000 questions. And interestingly, this is what came through this entity, according to this Charney Project. A reptilian race was holding back humans so they couldn't grow. The entity said they had fought many battles against the reptile race in their own reality. Humans were more evolved spiritually than the reptiles, but they suppress humans with their technology. Their God is their technology. That will become seriously relevant later in the day. But look, what did the Gnostics say? That humans have creative ability, where the archons don't. It says here, more spiritually evolved than the reptiles, but we are suppressed through technology. And what I was talking about, tuning humans into the fake reality, this brings us to endless stories of the manipulation of human genetics. Some appear in things like the Bible, but you find them all over the ancient world, again, relating to these gods of different names, which turn out to be basically the same. So in the Gnostic writings, they talk about, and remember, these have been in a sealed jar since about 350 AD. They've not been tinkered with and changed like the biblical texts that were expressions of these in many ways, but were out in the public arena and therefore could be changed. These have been sealed all that time. The Lord Archon, what they call the Demiurge, said, "Come, let us create a man according to the image of God and according to our likeness, that his image may become a light for us, a vehicle for us." And this brings us to the biblical texts, which again are mirrored all over the ancient world. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And you know, in this Noah film in 2014, they symbolized the bloodline with the human finger and the reptilian covered finger. Very, very symbolic and very true. Now, anyone thinks that all this genetic stuff is modern. It ain't. This is known as the genetic disc for obvious reasons. It was found in Colombia, and it is thousands of years old. And on this disc, which is incredibly well preserved, are images of human eggs and sperm that can only be seen under a microscope. And it talks about the birth process internally as well as externally, and the entities that it is portraying certainly ain't human. And you've got the Zulu, Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, with Credo Mutra, who's right into his 90s now. And this is one of the paintings he did of descriptions of this Chitahuri. And on one of his ancient artifacts that goes back at least 500 years, called the Necklace of the Mysteries, these images, these symbols, are used by the Zulu shaman to tell the story of Africa and the story of the human story. And pride of place at the front is a non-human entity and a human woman. And let's say that fits into that. And this is one of the flying saucer type image at the bottom. And I asked him what that was. He said, that's what the stories say the Chitahuri came to Earth in. But this, he said, is symbolic of the interbreeding between humans and the Chitahuri to create a hybrid race. This is the whole point. If you're at that level of understanding how reality works, you don't have to have literal interbreeding to change the human form into some kind of hybrid. You know, what we are doing is receiving and transmitting information. And if you change the information that the receiver, transmitter, decoding system is receiving, and that information relates to the human form, you can mutate the human form simply through getting people to decode that information. You see, the reason that radio, absolutely the descriptions of these entities and this inversion, and they're seeking to bring their reality into ours by syncing their frequency. The Golden Age society, the way it's described, and again in the way the Avatar movie doesn't hate. The heart doesn't seek to destroy. And so this inversion was about taking the point of interaction with the world from the point of love, heart, into the emotions. And how do we see now our society coherence with the central nervous system and the brain? Once we get into this, we start to disconnect from the heart, disconnect from beyond time and space, and start to have this as the governor of our perception. And if you take it in a computer game terms, the idea is to pull us into the betrayed. That society was a heart society. This was the point from which they interacted with the world, the heart, which allowed them to experience reality outside the bounds of time and space. When you come from the heart, you don't do hatred. The heart does. Now people interact with it from the level of emotional response and emotional reaction instead of here. And when that moves to that we interact with the world here, the world dramatically changes. And so, like I said earlier, with this heart